The night my mother pointed at the front door and told me to get out, she had a small smile on her face, not a happy smile. The kind of smile someone gets when they have finally decided something and feel powerful about it. I was 31 years old. I had lived in that house for the past 2 years, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because my father had gotten sick and someone needed to stay. That someone was always me. I cooked, I drove, I scheduled, I called the doctors, I rearranged my whole career around the needs of that household. And on the night that my mother told me to get out and never contact them again, my father was sitting in the next room and he said nothing. That silence was the thing that broke something open inside me. Not her voice, his silence. I picked up the bag I had not even fully unpacked from my last work trip and I walked out the door. I did not know that night was the beginning of the most important chapter of my life. I did not know who I was about to become. I only knew one thing with complete certainty as I stood in the cold outside that house. I was done being the one who stays when no one stays for her. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something real. If the person who was supposed to love you unconditionally looked you in the face and told you that your absence would make their life easier, what would you do? Would you fight to stay? Would you leave and never look back? Would you give them one more chance? Think about that while I tell you what Patricia did, because her answer might surprise you. My name is Patricia. I am 31 years old in this story, though I need to go back further than that night to make you understand what that moment really meant. I need to take you back to when I was 17, because that is when the pattern I would spend the next 14 years living inside first became clear to me, even if I did not have the words for it yet. My mother's name is Lorraine. She's a woman who has always known exactly what she wants and has always been very good at making other people feel responsible for giving it to her. She's not a monster. I want to be honest about that from the beginning because the truth is more complicated than monster. Lorraine is charming in public. She can make a room laugh. She gives money to the church fundraiser every year without being asked. She remembers birthdays. She sends cards with handwritten notes. If you met her at a dinner party, you would walk away thinking she was one of the warmest people you had ever met. That is real. I am not making that up to confuse you. But there is a version of Lorraine that only her children have seen, and that version is a different person entirely. My brother's name is Derek. He is 4 years older than me. Growing up, Derek was the child my mother pointed to when she wanted to demonstrate that she had done something right. He was the athlete. He was the one who made her stand up at school events. He got the trophies on the shelf in the living room. He got the framed photo on the mantle. He got the long complimentary speeches at family dinners. I was the other one. I was smart, but Lorraine did not value smart the way she valued visible. Smart was something you mentioned briefly before moving on to the next topic. Visible was something you celebrated. I do not say this to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because you need to understand the foundation. By the time I was 12 years old, I had already learned that my job in our family was to be useful, not celebrated. I helped with the dishes while Derek watched television. I helped my mother prep for parties while Derek was at practice. I organized the paperwork when my father, whose name is Gerald, started having trouble keeping things in order. I was the one who remembered the dentist appointments and the insurance renewal dates and the name of the neighbor's dog. I was the invisible infrastructure of that family, and I was rewarded for it with a kind of background appreciation that felt, at the time, like enough. The first time I clearly understood that it was not enough came when I was 17. I had applied to 3 universities and gotten into all three. The best one was 3 states away. It had a strong business program, a scholarship offer that would cover most of my costs, and a reputation that would open doors for me in ways that the local school simply would not. I was proud of it in a way I had never been proud of anything before. I had worked for it privately, quietly, without telling anyone what I was doing, because in our house, expectations were set for Derek, not for me. I told my parents over dinner. My father smiled. He said that was wonderful. He passed the salad bowl. My mother looked at the letter I had handed her, nodded slowly, and then said that it was a very long way from home. She said she was not sure it was practical. She said Derek was going to need support in his second year of college and it would be easier if I were around. She said the local school had a perfectly good business department. She put the letter on the table next to her plate and picked up her fork and resumed eating, and that was that. The conversation moved on. No one asked me how I felt. No one acknowledged what I had actually accomplished. Derek sent me a text later that night that said nice work. That was the whole text. Nice work. I went to the local school. I told myself it was practical. I told myself I chose it. But I knew, somewhere I could not name yet, that I had not chosen it at all. I had been managed into it so quietly and so smoothly that I almost did not feel the hand guiding me. I graduated with a degree in business administration and a minor in accounting. I started working at a mid-sized property management company called Haverford Associates. The pay was not spectacular, but the experience was real and the work suited me. I was organized, I was detail-oriented, I was good with numbers, and I was good at handling problems without drama. My manager at the time, a woman named Sandra, once told me that I was the kind of person who made complicated things look simple. I held on to that. It was the kind of comment my mother had never once made about me. For the first few years out of college, I lived in a small apartment 20 minutes from home. I visited on Sundays. I helped when help was needed. Derek had moved to a city 4 hours away with his girlfriend, whose name was Cassie, and they visited twice a year and called on holidays. My mother talked about Derek constantly on those Sunday visits. She talked about his job, his apartment, the furniture he had bought, the trips he and Cassie took. She would show me photos on her phone. She talked about him the way people talk about a favorite television show they are always catching up on. I listened, I nodded, I refilled her tea. When I was 26, my father had his first serious health episode. It was a cardiac event, not a full heart attack, but serious enough that the doctors sat my parents down and talked about lifestyle changes, medication management, and monitoring. My mother called me the same afternoon. She did not call Derek first. She called me. She said the doctors had given them a lot of information and she was overwhelmed and she needed help understanding the paperwork. I drove over that evening. I stayed until midnight going through everything. I made a binder, I labeled the medications, I wrote down the appointment schedule, I created a log for his daily readings. My mother looked at the binder and said that was helpful. She did not say thank you, she did not say I do not know what I would do without you. She said that was helpful, the way you might say that about a well-designed label. That was the beginning of a slow shift. Over the next 2 years, my father's health continued to be a careful management project. He was not dying, he was not in crisis, but he needed consistency, and consistency required someone nearby, and the person nearby was me. I started spending more nights at the house. Then I started keeping clothes there. Then, when my apartment lease came up for renewal and my mother mentioned, almost in passing, that it did not make sense for me to pay rent when my room was just sitting there empty, I let the lease go. I moved back home. I told myself it was temporary. Derek came for a weekend visit about 3 months after I moved back. He walked through the house, ate my cooking, watched the game with my father, and on the second night over dinner, he said to my mother that it was great that I was there to help out. He said it the way someone might compliment the weather, casually, without looking at me directly. Lorraine nodded and said yes, it worked out well. No one asked me if it worked out well for me. No one asked what I had given up or what I was quietly carrying. I was the arrangement that had worked out well, and that was the end of the conversation. During those 2 years at home, I did not stop working. I had actually been advancing steadily at Haverford Associates. Sandra had promoted me twice. I was managing a portfolio of 12 commercial properties, handling tenant relationships, overseeing maintenance contracts, and producing quarterly financial reports. I had also started doing some freelance consulting work on the side, helping smaller landlords with their operations and documentation. I was building something real. But I was building it quietly, and around me the assumption had quietly settled that my life was less demanding than it looked, that I had more flexibility than other people, that I could absorb additional responsibilities at home without anything falling away on the other side. The thing about invisible labor is that people mistake its invisibility for lightness. They do not see you doing it, so they assume it is not heavy. My mother thought I was coasting. She thought I had chosen an easy path and that helping at home was my contribution to a family that had done so much for me. She said that once directly, during an argument we had about the grocery shopping. She said that I had been given a lot and that doing my part at home was reasonable. I asked her what she meant by given a lot. She listed the roof over my head growing up, the tuition for the local college that my parents had contributed to, the family dinners, the birthday celebrations. She did not list the 3 states away university I did not attend. She did not list the 2 years of my life I had rearranged to be there. Those did not appear on her list. I kept my feelings about that conversation in a very small, very organized mental compartment. I was good at that. Years of being the useful one had made me efficient at managing my own emotional responses so they did not inconvenience anyone. I smiled. I went back to the grocery list. I drove to the store. I came home and put everything away and made dinner and called the pharmacy about my father's prescription and went to bed. That was a Tuesday. The breaking point, when it finally came, did not arrive as a single explosion. It arrived the way most breaking points arrive in quiet families. It arrived as an accumulation that finally tipped past what I could hold. It started with Derek's announcement. He and Cassie were getting married. The wedding would be in 8 months. It would be at a venue in the city where they lived. My mother was ecstatic. She called me the day she found out, and I could hear the joy in her voice in a way I had not heard in a long time. She talked for 45 minutes about the venue, about Cassie's dress, about the guest list, about the reception dinner. She said it was going to be beautiful. She said she had always known Derek would end up with someone special. She said she was so proud of him. She did not ask me one question about my life during that 45 minutes. Not one. I said all the right things. I said I was so happy for them. I asked about the colors and the flowers. I asked if she needed help with anything. She said that actually, yes, there was quite a bit to coordinate on the family side and she would need my help managing all of that. Of course she would. I said of course. And then the call ended and I sat in my old childhood bedroom surrounded by the walls I had grown up inside, and I felt something very cold and very clear settle in my chest. Over the next several weeks, I became the quiet engine behind the family's wedding preparation. I coordinated travel arrangements for the extended relatives who were coming from out of town. I organized the hotel block. I tracked RSVPs on a spreadsheet. I arranged a family dinner at a restaurant near the venue for the night before the wedding. I ordered the flowers for my mother to bring as a gift to the rehearsal dinner. I made sure my father's suit was pressed and his shoes were shined. I booked my own hotel room and arranged my own travel and told no one what any of that took because no one asked. The wedding itself was lovely. I will say that honestly, the venue was beautiful. Cassie was radiant. Derek looked happier than I had seen him in years. I stood in the family row and I clapped and I cried a little because it was a wedding and there was music and flowers and two people looking at each other with real feeling. I am not made of stone, but something happened at the reception that I want to tell you about carefully because it matters. During the speeches, Derek stood up and thanked a list of people. He thanked Cassie's parents. He thanked my parents. He thanked his groomsmen by name. He thanked the wedding planner by name. He thanked the venue coordinator. He thanked the catering manager. Then he sat down. He did not say my name. I had spent 8 months coordinating the moving parts of that family's participation in his wedding. I had made 47 separate phone calls, sent over 200 emails, and created 3 separate organizational documents to make sure that everything on the family side ran without a single hiccup. He did not say my name. I looked at my mother. She was beaming at Derek. She was raising her glass. She was nodding at something Cassie's mother was saying. She did not look at me. I excused myself from the table and went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I did not cry. I thought about that. I was surprised I did not cry. What I felt instead was something more quiet, something more final. It was the feeling of a person who has just seen something very clearly for the very first time, even though the evidence was always there. I went back to the table. I stayed through the cake. I danced once with my father, who held my hand and told me I looked beautiful. I am not sure he remembered the speeches. I am not sure he had heard them clearly with his hearing the way it had gotten. But he held my hand. Dee said I looked beautiful, and I held on to that. I drove home the next morning. My parents drove back with Derek and Cassie, who had offered to take them home before heading to the airport for their honeymoon. I had offered first 3 weeks earlier. I had been told it was already sorted out. Back at the house, I started thinking. I had been thinking for a while, but now I was thinking in a different way. I started paying attention to the gap between what I contributed and what was acknowledged. I started keeping a small, private record, not for revenge, for clarity. I needed to see the pattern in writing because I had spent so long living inside it that I had started to mistake it for normal. Over the next 3 months, what I saw in that record was not comfortable. I saw that I had covered 41 separate household tasks in a single month, from scheduling to purchasing to coordinating to communicating. I saw that I had never once been asked whether any of those things were convenient for me. I saw that on the 4 occasions my mother had bragged about me to extended family members, every single instance was connected to something I had done for someone else, never for myself. She was proud of me when I was useful to others. She was not interested in me when I was working on my own life. I also saw something I had not fully registered before. My father's health had stabilized considerably. He was not in crisis. He did not need round-the-clock management. He needed medication reminders, which he was increasingly able to handle with the phone alarm system I had set up and occasional drives to appointments. He did not need me living in that house. That was a truth I had been avoiding because avoiding it was easier than facing what my presence there actually meant. I started making quiet plans. I did not announce them. I had learned early that announcing plans in that house created an opportunity for redirection. I reached out to a real estate agent I had met through work. I started looking at apartments. I also started having a more serious internal conversation about my freelance consulting work, which had grown steadily over the past year and was generating a meaningful secondary income. I began to think seriously about whether the time had come to take that from a side project to something larger. Then something happened that I was not prepared for. My mother came to my room one evening and sat on the edge of my bed and told me that she and my father had been talking. She said that Derek and Cassie were going to be starting a family soon and that she thought it would be good to have some financial stability in place. She said they had been thinking about redistributing some of the family assets to help Derek and Cassie get a house. She said they wanted to give Derek an advance on his portion of what he would eventually inherit, which would mean giving him a sum now. She said it was only fair, given that he and Cassie were building something and needed support. I asked her what that meant for the house and for the overall plan. She said that Gerald had some savings and they would be fine. She said she was just keeping me informed. She did not ask my opinion. She did not say anything about my contribution. She did not say anything about the fact that I had been living there for 2 years at significant personal cost and zero compensation, and that the money she was describing transferring to Derek was money I had quietly helped preserve by covering household expenses from my own pocket on multiple occasions without saying anything. I stayed very calm. I said thank you for telling me. She left the room. That night I sat at my desk and I looked at a spreadsheet I had been maintaining quietly for almost a year. It was a careful, documented record of every expense I had covered for that household. Groceries, medications, utility bills I had spotted and covered without comment, a plumber, a car repair, a medical copay I had paid when my mother said she did not have her card. The total was not small. The total was, in fact, significantly more than what my room and utilities would have cost me if I had been a paying tenant. But I had not been a tenant, I had been a daughter, and the difference between those two things was apparently invisible. I also made another calculation that night. I looked at my consulting income over the previous 12 months. I looked at the client base I had built quietly alongside my full-time job. I looked at the contracts I had in progress. I looked at the opportunity I had been offered 6 weeks earlier by a commercial real estate developer named Marcus Ackafer, who wanted to bring me on as a primary operations consultant for a portfolio expansion he was planning. The offer was serious. The compensation was significant. It would require my full focus and the end of my arrangement at Haverford Associates, but it would position me to finally build the independent business I had been thinking about for years. I had been putting off giving Marcus an answer because I had been thinking about what it would mean for the household. That night I stopped thinking about the household. I sent Marcus an email. I said I was in. Over the next 4 weeks I made careful, quiet preparations. I found an apartment 8 miles away. I signed the lease. I started moving small things and gradually, a box here, a bag there, on days when my mother was out. I gave my notice at Haverford. I told Sandra the truth, that I was going out on my own. She hugged me. She said she had been waiting for me to do this for 2 years. I had planned to have a proper conversation with my parents. I had a whole speech prepared. I was going to sit them down and explain that I had found an apartment, that I would make sure my father's care management was properly transitioned with detailed documentation, that I would remain available by phone, that I was grateful for the roof over my head and sorry for any disruption my leaving caused. I was going to be thoughtful and kind and organized even in my exit because that was who I was. I never got to give that speech. The conversation that happened instead started because my mother found a receipt. I had ordered a set of blinds for the new apartment, and the delivery confirmation had printed automatically to the shared printer in the study, which my mother used regularly. She picked it up and read it and came to find me in the kitchen. She held the receipt and her face was a specific kind of tight, not angry exactly, caught out, as if she was the one who had been deceived. She asked me what this was. I told her I had rented an apartment. She stood very still. She asked why I had not told her. I said I had been planning to tell her and that I was sorry she found out this way. She asked how long I had been planning this. I was honest. I said about a month. She asked if I knew what this meant for them and for my father. I said that I had documented everything for my father's care and would make sure the transition was smooth. She said that was not what she meant. She said that I had made a decision that affected everyone in this house without consulting anyone. That was the moment. That was the exact sentence that opened something in me that had been locked for a long time. I said very quietly that I was 31 years old and that I had not been consulted about a number of decisions that affected me. She went very still. I said it calmly. I did not yell. I did not list things dramatically. I said it once clearly and then I waited. My mother took a long breath and she said some things. She said I was being selfish. She said I always made everything about myself. She said that she and my father had sacrificed for this family and that loyalty meant something. She said that I had always had a problem with gratitude. She cycled through those words like she was reading from a script she had prepared long ago for exactly this moment. I stood in the kitchen and I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I said that I hoped she understood that I cared about this family and that I would always make sure my father was looked after. I said I was moving out at the end of the week. That was when she said it. She said, "Get out now." She said, "Do not wait until the end of the week." She said, "If you want to leave, then leave today and do not come back." She said, "And do not contact us." She said those words, "Do not contact us." Not me, not your father, us. As if she had already spoken for him. As if his silence in the next room was a vote she was authorized to cast. I went to my room, I packed what I could fit in my car, I left the rest. I walked past the living room where my father was watching television. I stopped. I said, "I love you, Dad." He looked up from the screen. He said, "Okay, sweetheart." He did not know what was happening. I am still not sure he understood what was happening. I walked out the front door and I drove to my half-furnished apartment and I sat on the floor because I did not have a couch yet and I stayed there for a very long time. I did not call anyone that night. I did not post anything. I did not text Derek. I just sat with it. I let it be as heavy as it actually was without trying to manage it into something lighter. This was new for me. The old Patricia would have immediately started problem solving, would have started thinking about how to repair the situation, would have been writing an apology in her head before the dust had even settled. But the woman sitting on the floor of that empty apartment did something different. She just breathed, and she let herself feel exactly how unfair it was. And then she went to sleep on a mattress with no frame and she woke up in the morning and she started building. The first 3 months were hard in ways I had not fully anticipated, not because I missed living with my parents. I did not miss the daily texture of that ooze. What I missed was the idea of family, the version I had always hoped we might become, the version where I was seen clearly and valued for who I was rather than what I could do. Grieving the real family you have is complicated because you are also grieving the imaginary family you kept trying to build inside the real one. That double grief is quiet and heavy, and it sits with you while you are working and while you are driving and sometimes right before you fall asleep. But here is what else those 3 months were. They were the most productive months of my professional life up to that point. The Marcus Aquifer project was everything I had hoped it would be. Marcus was developing a mixed-use commercial portfolio across 3 separate markets. He needed someone who could build operational infrastructure from scratch, systems for vendor management, financial tracking, tenant communication, regulatory compliance, everything. I was, in the language of that spreadsheet I had maintained privately for over a year, exactly the right person for exactly that job. I worked long hours. I was sharp and focused and unencumbered by the constant low-level drain that had been running in the background of my life for 2 years. Within 6 weeks, I had overhauled Marcus's existing vendor contracts, identified 2 areas of significant cost leakage, and created a reporting system that gave him real-time visibility into each property's financial performance. He called me after I presented the 6-week summary and said it was the clearest picture he had ever had of his own business. He asked if I had considered forming my own consulting company. I told him I had. He asked if I would be interested in being his exclusive operations partner if I did. We talked for 2 hours. We agreed on terms the following week. I registered the company 3 days later, Larkspur Operations Consulting. It was just me, a strong laptop, a very organized filing system, and a decade of expertise I had been building quietly in the background of a life that had never fully acknowledged it. But it was mine. Every piece of it was mine. I want to be careful here not to make this sound easy, because it was not easy. Building a business while processing a family rupture is a specific kind of hard. There were evenings when I sat alone in my apartment and felt the absence of my parents like a physical weight. There were Sundays when the old habit of driving to the house for dinner rose in me, and I had to sit with the fact that I had nowhere to go and no one expecting me. There were moments when I was lonely in a way that felt too large for my small apartment. I let those moments happen. I did not pretend they were not real, but I also did not let them redirect me. I found a therapist named Dr. Amara. She was quiet and precise, and she asked the right questions. The first thing she told me that actually changed something was this. She said that for a person who had spent years being the emotional labor provider in a family system, learning to receive care was often harder than learning to give it. She said I had spent so long making sure everyone around me had what they needed that I had almost no practice identifying or requesting what I needed. She said that was not a character flaw. It was a trained response to an environment where my needs were consistently deprioritized. She said my job now was to learn to be as good at receiving as I had always been at giving. I thought about that for a long time. 6 months after I left, I got a text from Derek. It came on a Saturday morning while I was reviewing a contract. His name appeared on my screen and I felt my chest tighten in a way I had to consciously release. The text said, "Hey," just that, "Hey." I looked at it for a while, then I put my phone down and finished reviewing the contract. Then I picked my phone back up and typed back, "Hey," and waited. Derek's next message came 40 minutes later. He said he had heard I moved out. He said it sounded like things had gotten complicated. He said he hoped I was doing okay. I noticed that he did not say what he had heard or from whom or what version of events had been delivered to him. I noticed that he framed it as complicated rather than as anything more specific. I noticed that he asked if I was okay rather than asking what had actually happened. Derek had always been good at checking in without really checking in. I wrote back and said I was doing well and that I had started my own company. He responded with a surprised emoji. I sent him the website I had built for Larkspur. He sent back a thumbs up. That was the extent of our reconnection at that point. It was shallow and careful, and neither of us pushed through the surface, but it was something. What happened next came from a direction I had not anticipated. One of the properties in Marcus's portfolio included a small commercial strip that had been underperforming for several years. Through my audit of the leasee and G arrangements, I identified that 2 of the tenants were paying significantly below market rates because their leases had never been properly reviewed. When I presented this to Marcus, he asked me to take the lead on the renegotiation process. It was a delicate situation involving long-term tenants with established relationships, and it required careful, patient, relationship-based management. I handled it over 3 months of structured conversations and well-documented proposals. The end result was a renegotiated agreement that added just under $200,000 annually to the portfolio's revenue. Marcus called it a masterclass. He asked me to present the case study at a small commercial real estate investors summit he was participating in, 40 people in a room in the city. I prepared for 2 weeks. I stood at the front of that room and I talked through the problem, the process, and the outcome with a clarity and confidence that I had always had in private but had rarely been called to show in public. When I finished, 3 people came up to me afterward with business cards. One of them was a developer named Ingrid Halst, who ran a mid-size firm that was expanding into a new market and needed exactly the kind of operational expertise I had just demonstrated. Ingrid became my second major client 3 weeks later. Larkspur was no longer just a contract arrangement with Marcus. It was a real business with a second anchor client and a presentation case study I could use to attract more. I want to tell you what happened 8 months after I left that house. My father called me. It was a weekday afternoon. I saw his number and I sat with it for 3 rings before I answered. He sounded like himself, which is to say he sounded a little slow, a little careful, a little unsure of the ground he was standing on. He said, "Hello, sweetheart." I said, "Hello, Dad." There was a pause. He said he had been thinking about me. I said I had been thinking about him too. He said he was not sure exactly what had happened, but that he did not think he had handled things well. He said he should have said something that night. He said he was sorry he did not. I held the phone and I felt something very complicated move through me. I said, "Thank you for saying that." He asked if I was doing all right. I said I was doing very well, actually. He said he was glad. There was another long pause and then he said he had found a card I had put in the medication binder with my new phone number on it. He said Lorraine did not know he was calling. That was its own kind of truth. My father, who loved me in the only way he knew how, which was a quiet way that did not often find its voice, had to make a private phone call to reach me because my mother had constructed a silence and he was living inside it. He was not ready to walk out of it, but he had reached his hand through it. We talked for 20 minutes. He told me about his health, which was stable. He told me about the garden, which he had been tending more in the spring. He asked me about work and I told him briefly about Larkspur and he said that sounded like a big deal. I said it was coming along. He said he was proud of me. He said it quietly, almost to himself, the way people say things they have been holding for a long time. I said, "Thank you, Dad." We said goodbye. He said he would try to call again. I sat with that call for the rest of the day. I felt it in layers. The warmth of it, the sadness underneath the warmth, the particular grief of realizing that your father loves you but cannot choose you over the atmosphere of the house he lives in. I did not let it take me backward, but I let it be what it was. A complicated, real moment between two people who cared about each other and were separated by something neither of them had fully chosen. 3 weeks after my father's call, something happened that I had not predicted and could not have planned for. Lorraine called. It was a Sunday morning. I saw her name and I did not answer immediately. I let it ring. I thought about what I wanted to say. I thought about what I did not want to say. I thought about Dr. Amara's advice, which was that I did not owe anyone an emotional performance of reconciliation and that clarity was more important than warmth in conversations where trust had been seriously broken. Then I answered. My mother's voice was different from the last time I had heard it. It was smaller, not weak. My mother is not a weak woman, but smaller in the way a person sounds when they have been turning something over for a long time and have finally decided to say it. She said she had been thinking. She said she wanted to talk. I said I was listening. She said she had heard that I had started a business. I asked her where she had heard that. She said Derek had mentioned it. I said that was true. She said she was glad I was doing well. I said thank you. Then she said the real thing she had called to say. She said that she and Gerald had been reviewing their finances. She said the money they had given Derek for the house had put them in a tighter position than they had expected. She said they needed some help navigating a refinancing conversation and that they had asked someone from the church, but that person had not been very helpful. She said that given my background, she thought maybe I could take a look at their situation and help them think through some options. I want you to understand what I felt in that moment. I want to be very honest about it. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel satisfied in a vindictive way. What I felt was tired. A deep, old tiredness that had been living underneath everything else. Because even in the call she was making to reconnect with her daughter after months of painful silence, the entry point was what I could do for her, not who I was, not what I might need, not what we might repair together. The entry point was the same as it had always been, what I could provide. I said I would think about it. She said she appreciated that. The call lasted 9 minutes. When it ended, I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote in a notebook I had started keeping since my first session with Dr. Amara. I wrote what had happened and I wrote what I had felt and I wrote what I needed to decide. What I decided after a week of thinking was this. I would help my father. I would not help my mother the way she was asking. I would reach out to my father directly and offer to connect him with a financial advisor I trusted through my professional network. I would make that referral cleanly and professionally, as a daughter who cared about her father's security, not as a family management service that had been reactivated after a suspension. I called my father and told him I wanted to help him connect with someone I trusted. He sounded relieved. I could hear it in his breathing. I made the introduction that same week. The financial advisor's name was Carol. She was thorough and kind, and she helped my parents understand their options clearly. She also, in the course of those conversations, uncovered something that none of us had known. There was a whole-of-life insurance policy in my father's name, a policy that had been set up years ago when he was working, that had a significant accumulated cash value component. No one had been reviewing it. No one had thought to look. The policy had been sitting quietly building value for over 20 years. When Carol explained this to my father and he called me to tell me about it, I could hear in his voice that he understood something he had not understood before. He understood that the daughter who had been asked to leave, the daughter who had been told, "Do not contact us," was still the person who had made the call that changed their financial picture. He said, "Patricia, I do not know how to thank you." I said, "You do not need to thank me." He said no, he needed to say it. He said thank you. My mother did not call to say thank you. She sent a text. It said Carol was very helpful. That was the whole message. I read it twice and then I put my phone down and I went back to work. The thing that happened next was the thing I genuinely had not anticipated. Ingrid Halst, my second major client, was expanding more aggressively than initially planned. She was acquiring a portfolio of 8 additional properties across 2 markets, and she needed her operations infrastructure to scale rapidly. She asked me to consider taking on a co-director role in her company, not as an employee but as a partner with equity. This was a different conversation than any I had had before. It was not a consulting contract. It was an ownership offer. Ingrid was offering me a piece of something real. I took 3 weeks to think about it. I consulted a lawyer I had met through Marcus. I reviewed the financial projections carefully. I thought about what Larkspur could become if I maintained independence versus what it could become if I used a partnership like this as a platform. In the end, I said yes to a limited partnership structure that gave me a meaningful equity stake while preserving my ability to maintain Larkspur as a separate entity. It was a complex structure and it took another 4 weeks to finalize. But when the papers were signed, I owned a piece of something that was already generating significant revenue. I was 32 years old by then. It had been just over a year since my mother stood in the kitchen holding a receipt and told me not to come back. Derek came to visit the city where I was now living for a work conference. He texted and asked if I wanted to get coffee. I said yes. We met at a place near my apartment. He looked well. He looked like someone who had been living a comfortable life and who felt moderately guilty about something he was not ready to name directly. We ordered, we made small talk. Then he said he had heard things were going really well for me professionally. I said yes. He said he wished he had stayed in better touch. I said it was okay. He said he did not know exactly what had happened between me and Mom. I looked at him for a moment and then I said, I think on some level you do know, Derek. He looked at his coffee. He nodded once. He said, yeah. That single syllable was more honest than anything he had said to me in years. I did not need a speech. I did not need an apology in the airport lobby style with full emotional performance. I needed that one small, honest acknowledgement, and I got it, and I let it be enough. We talked for 2 hours. We talked about real things, about his marriage and the honest parts of it, not just the polished version, about the baby he and Cassie were expecting, about what our childhood had actually felt like from the inside, which was a conversation neither of us had ever had as adults, about the way our family had organized itself around his visible achievements and my invisible labor, and how neither of us had chosen that exactly, but both of us had lived inside it. He said he was sorry. He said it imperfectly and somewhat awkwardly and without the right words, but he said it. I told him I appreciated it. I told him I was not angry at him. I told him I hoped we could build something different going forward. He said he would like that. I meant it. He meant it too, I think. We said goodbye outside the coffee place and he hugged me and it was a little stiff but a little real. He told me to come visit when the baby arrived. I said I would think about it. He laughed. I smiled. And I walked home feeling something I could not immediately name, but that felt after a while like the early stages of a door reopening. Not all the way, not yet, but enough to let some light through. My mother called again in the late autumn, about 14 months after I had left the house. This time the call was different. She was still herself in it, meaning she was still organizing her words carefully, still managing the emotional temperature, still not the kind of person who leads with vulnerability. But there was something underneath the organization that I had not heard before, something that sounded like it had cost her something to pick up the phone. She said she had been talking to someone. She did not say it was a therapist. She said she had been talking to someone at the church, one of the women in her circle who had lost her daughter to estrangement some years ago and had since made a partial repair, and that those conversations had made her think about some things. She said she was not sure she had always been fair to me. She said it like someone reading a sentence that they had practiced but still found difficult. She said she did not want the thing between us to stay the way it was. I held the phone and I thought about every version of what I could say. I thought about the years, the saved seat that was never saved for me, the speeches that did not include my name, the graduate school that I attended by not attending, the 2 years of my life in that house, the receipt she had used as a detonator instead of an invitation to a conversation. I thought about all of it. And then I said something that surprised even me. I said I appreciated her saying that. I said I had needed to hear it. I said I was not ready to go back to the way things were because the way things were had not been working for me for a long time. I said that if she wanted a real relationship with me, I was open to that, but it would have to be a different kind of relationship than the one we had before. It would have to be one where I was a full person to her, not just a useful one. It would have to be one where she was willing to hear things that were uncomfortable. It would have to be one where my father was also free to call me without it feeling like a covert operation. There was a long pause. She said she understood. I did not know if she fully understood. I did not know if she was capable of the kind of relationship I was describing, but she said she understood, and that was a beginning, a real beginning, not a performance of a beginning. We have met 3 times since that call. Each time has been careful and a little formal and not yet warm in the old easy way. but each time has also been honest in a way that our old Sunday dinners never were. She has said things that cost her something to say. I have received them without using them as ammunition. We are building something cautiously, the way you build something on ground that has shifted. You test each step before you put your weight on it. My father comes to those meetings with her. He sits across from me and he looks at me with an expression I cannot always fully read, but that contains, I believe, something close to pride. Not the pride of a person who is proud of a performance. The pride of a person who is proud of who someone actually is. He does not say much, but he holds my hand when we say goodbye, and he always says be good, S. Weedheart, the way he said it when I was a child and I was leaving for school. I always say I will. Larkspur Operations Consulting turned 18 months old and I celebrated by hiring my first full-time employee. Her name is Joy. She is 25 and she is sharp and organized and deeply underestimated by the people around her, which I recognized immediately. I told her in her second week that I expected her to tell me when something was not working, including if something I was doing was not working. She looked at me a little surprised. She said she would do that. I said good. Because I was not building a company that ran the way my family had run, on invisible labor and unspoken rules, and people who kept the peace at the cost of their own voice. The Ingrid partnership has continued to grow. The portfolio she and I are jointly operating now generates enough that my personal financial picture looks nothing like it did the night I sat on the floor of an empty apartment with no couch and a mattress with no frame. I am not going to give you a number because numbers are not the point of this story. The point is that I built it. I built it from the same intelligence and work ethic and organizational clarity that I had spent over a decade using to hold together a house that was not fully mine. The difference is that now it is mine, all of it. I think about that apartment floor sometimes. I think about the specific quality of the quiet in that room. The kind of quiet that is not peaceful but is the absence of noise, the kind of quiet you hear when you are so tired and so hollowed out that the usual rushing sound of your own thoughts slows to almost nothing. I think about how in that quiet, in that empty room, I did not pray for my mother to take it back. I did not rehearse the argument I should have made. I just breathed. And I let myself arrive at the place I was actually in, instead of the place I had always been managing toward on someone else's behalf. That arrival was the beginning of everything that came after. I want to say something about the people who hurt us. The ones who do it without violence, without drama, without anything you can hold up to the light and say, look at this is proof. The quiet hurters, the ones who organize you out of your own life so gradually and so smoothly that you almost do not notice it happening. I want to say that the hardest part of leaving them is not the leaving itself. The hardest part is accepting that they are not going to fully understand what they took. They are not going to have the revelation you hoped for. They are not going to see the spreadsheet in your desk and weep. They are going to call when they need something, and they are going to say they have been thinking, and they are going to make something close to an apology in the language they have available. And you are going to have to decide whether that is enough for the kind of relationship you are willing to try to build going forward. The answer is different for everyone. For me, the answer has been a careful yes, a conditional yes, a yes that has its own boundaries built into it and its own quiet monitoring system that I maintain not out of bitterness but out of self-knowledge. I know who I am now in a way I did not know at 31, standing in a kitchen being told to get out. I know what I need, I know what I will not keep quiet about. I know the difference between keeping the peace and losing myself. That knowledge is not something my mother gave me. It is something I found in the silence of an empty apartment and kept building until it became my whole life. I am 32 now, almost 33. I have a company with a real name and real clients and a real future. I have an apartment that has furniture in every room. I have a therapist who asks the right questions. I have a brother who is imperfect and trying. I have a father who calls me on Thursday afternoons when he feels like it and sometimes says nothing much and sometimes says everything he has been holding for a week. I have a mother who is learning slowly to see me as something more than what I can provide. I have Joy, who is going to be extraordinary. I have Marcus, who told me 6 months ago that working with me was the best professional decision he had made in a decade. And I have myself, clearly, fully, finally. I have Patricia, and she is enough. If Patricia's story touched something you have been carrying, I want to ask you this one thing before you go. Think about the version of yourself that existed before the moment everything shifted. The one who stayed too long, helped too much, kept too quiet, and called it loyalty. Where is that person now? If you walked away from something that was quietly taking everything, what did you build in the space it left behind? Or if you are still in that space, still in the quiet before the move, what is one true thing you know about yourself that you have not let yourself say out loud why? Leave it in the comments. Patricia's story is for everyone who has ever been the useful one. This is where the conversation begins.